Alright, this is Dark Books, a trade paperback collecting all 16 issues of the Dark Books series, as well as 3 short stories from some other comics, and finally an issue of Doctor Strange. And straight away you will be asking, what the fuck is Dark Books? And why the fuck are they reprinting it? And how the fuck are they charging the equivalent of $40 for this? Right, Marvel have this weird thing where they refuse to reprint all Ghost Driver. There he is there. But every October comes around and they put out horror collections to go with Halloween. But they ignore Ghost Driver, and instead they force out stuff like Werewolf at 8 or Monsters of Frankenstein. Never ever Ghost Driver though. And Ghost Driver is their most popular horror character, like there's no contest. He is huge. He has had 2 films, people on the street recognise him, but you just can't get any trades of his old stories. You can get ones where they involve a completely different character, like the one that drives a car, or the one with a scythe, or ones that revamp the original character so much, like when they made him into a literal angel. And the reason for this is because the creator of Ghost Driver, Marvel, didn't want to give him any money. He actually became homeless. It's quite sad. He wasn't allowed to ever refer to himself as the creator of Ghost Driver, and he never got any royalties from Marvel, not even for the films. He is dead now. He died a couple of months ago, and you would think maybe Marvel would either commemorate his death by finally reprinting some Ghost Driver, or more likely, they would be so horrid that they would realise now that he's dead, they don't have to pay him royalties. But no, instead we got this, Dark Books. This was a Ghost Driver spin-off from the 90s, and it was also the least successful of all the Ghost Driver spin-offs from the 90s. And I've set it up like a failure, and in some regards it is. I'm reviewing a trade here, so how I normally do them is I go over the first few issues and then kind of just gloss over the rest. It would take ages to do an in-depth review of everything in here. And you know what? If you like the sound of it, you're not having it spoiled. Right, the premise is there is a dark book, hence the title, and it is full of black magic. Although you probably can't call it that anymore. And the Dark Book actually has a really interesting history in the Marvel Universe. And in many ways, I think the series could have been great. And I do respect some of it. What it was trying to do, or at least what it had potential to do. We start with issue number 1, which is part 4 of 6. It's a crossover. That's a great way to start a trade and a series, isn't it? This actually happens a lot in this collection with crossovers, and in all fairness, this one here, the first issue, it isn't that bad for it. It's mostly concerned with introducing characters and setup. The premise of the book is there are missing pages from the Dark Book, and Warwick Davis, always good to see him in a comic, he is going around and he is handing them to unsuspecting victims who use them, and they are invariably victims to Faustian deals. This is the main character. There are 3 main characters in this. Well, there's 5, but the other 2 we don't get to for a while. There's only 3 at the start. This is Victoria Malteser, and she is really the only main character that receives any depth. It's kind of the classic story. She winds up being thrust into the world of black magic and demons. Like, she's a point of view character, and she is actually a lesbian. That is her girlfriend there, and they are a pretty attractive couple. I'd watch them on a webcam stream, and you know what? This book actually does a really good job of the relationship. There's no preaching, there is no ham-fisted stuff. They are just lovers who happen to be lesbians. But someone is trying to kill Victoria, and she wakes up in the hospital, and this guy here, the one with the brown hair, he's another of the main characters. He is called Bill Buchanan, and he's a policeman, and whereas I said Victoria, she's given some character, this guy really is given none. And then we get to meet the final part of the cast. The final character is Whoopi Goldberg here. And the other two, they are original characters. They were introduced in this issue. Whoopi Goldberg, though, I think she might have been from an old Doctor Strange story, because she mentions knowing him later in the book from a specific story from his comic. But at the same time, that meeting could have just been off panel and she could be new as well. The formula for most of this series is that these three, they go to investigate someone who is using one of the pages of the Dark Book, and bad stuff is generally happening. And Ghost Driver, he is in this first one, and the crossover it is a part of, it has this baddie, and it's not that hard to follow. We're just lacking some little context. And at the end of the first issue, we are introduced to one of the supporting characters, this guy here. And in my opinion, he's the most interesting character in the whole book. He is called Magic Moor the Mystical, and he's an old character, a really old character actually. He's also a failed character. Marvel introduced him as a solo star in the 70s, and he was cancelled after 2 issues. I think that is like the shortest a series has ever lasted. Well, except for Chelsea Cairn ones, which never come out. His gimmick, Magic Moor the Mysticals, he was from medieval times, the court of King Arthur, stuff like that. He was a sorcerer, but he was like frozen in time, kind of like a caveman in ice, and he was unearthed in the modern day. And he was like a wimpy little guy who dressed stupid, and he spoke like a dandy. And then in the 80s, in a really good story, an Avengers story by Mark Griswold and Jason Byrne, it's called The Yesterday Quest. They brought Magic Moor the Mystical back, and they made him into a villain. They corrupted him, had him seduced by the Dark Book. Really, really good story, actually. And Mark Griswold, he kept coming back to the character. He was in his run on The Thing. He was at the start of his run on Captain America. He's in a few issues of Kazar. And then he showed up in this book here. And as I said, he is far and away the most interesting thing in it. They didn't make him a hero. They make him kind of just an accomplice to the heroes. And really, he shows that maybe this book, it could have been better if they had used established characters, like even obscure ones. I have no problem with Victoria here, but these 3 main characters, they are nobodies. How are they expected to hold a book? I mean, Magic Moor's a nobody too, but I don't know, throw in Mr. Voodoo or Dr. Drew. And actually, you know who would be really good as the central character in this? A solid B-list character, the original Spider-Girl, Jessica Drews. Because she has history with the Dark Book, and she has a following. She would have been a good focus for this series. And the thing is, if you throw a bunch of C-list or B-list characters together, then the sum total of each of their fan bases, that can sometimes help sell a book or keep it afloat, keep it going steady. This is issue number 2, and issue number 2 is weird. It's awkward. It's probably the most straightforward of all of them, and the thing is though, I just think this book, it could have done with a co-writer. I feel this writer, he has got ideas and he knows what he's wanting to do, but the script is really stilted. Like, characters will just say exposition, there's no real personality to a lot of what they're saying, and then there are points in the story where things happen just because they have to happen. A good example Actually, a good example of some weird writing is in this issue, actually, right here. This guy, he has got information they need, and they go to see him, and they warn him that he's in danger, and he says he'll be fine because he has got loads of security people. And then later on, 2 pages time, they go back to see him again because he was withholding information. They go to interrogate him, and those guards that he mentioned, suddenly they're just not a consideration. They're not mentioned at all. And Bill Buchanan, he shoots him in the foot, and no guards come running in. So either the guards were all taking a night off, or the central characters, they murdered all the guards, because Bill murders the guy at the end here. So the guards, they were just doing their job. They probably weren't evil. And we've got the problem where the central characters seem to have just murdered them all off panel. And the characters are potentially cold-blooded murderers now. And, this annoys us. This really annoys us. Whoopi Goldberg's character is as much as a trope. She is just there to be wise and knowledgeable, and then to shut down characters with sass or hilariously emasculating them. And here she is in a suit of armour, a giant mech suit, 2 issues in. It isn't cool, it's just really embarrassing, really. I do like this element here, though. They are trying to defuse a bomb, and they cut the wrong wire, and the timer, it starts jumping to random numbers, and I think that is quite a good little setup. You could kind of milk that for a whole issue. Then we get to issue number 3, and this is the one that brings Magic Moor to the forefront. Good cover, actually. That's the best cover for the whole series. We have also got Charlotte Witch, and she has come down with a terrible case of the mumps. Look at her neck there, it's huge. And this is good, this one, because it calls back to the Yesterday quest. In that, Charlotte Witch was possessed by the Dark Book, and here she gets possessed again. And this is kind of what I think this book should be doing. Exploring the Dark Book and its history while preventing it from being used. And the Charlotte Witch stuff, this is probably what kept us reading. And then we've got Magic Moor, and he tells his origin by animating a dead corpse. And this whole issue actually is kind of dodgy. The thing is, there is this woman, and she was raped, and now she is a hermit. She lives alone in a cabin. She refuses to go outside, and Warwick Davis, he shows up and gives her a chance to either be beautiful or get revenge, and she chooses to be beautiful. And you know what she does? She looks beautiful. And then she goes outside, and instead of people like worshipping her and telling her she's beautiful, she just gets raped again. And then she crawls back to her cabin, and this time she chooses revenge. And I don't like this, really. This poor woman, she has suffered so much, and the story, it hinges on making out like she is the villain, because she used a page of the Dark Book. And then the main characters, they go to this town and see all the mayhem that is being caused, and then Saberclaw shows up, and a good picture of him, actually. And Saberclaw, he's just utterly irrelevant. And of course, Saberclaw, he is like one of the most brutal characters in the Marvel Universe. He's a serial killer. So naturally, Whoopi Goldberg is the one who beats him by shooting him in the bollocks with a shotgun. But as I said, this woman, though, it's just a wrong-headed story. We're meant to feel for her rapist here when he is killed. And then what happens at the end of this one is Magic Moor shows up. Magic Moor shows up and he saves the day, but by sacrificing other people's lives. It's an alright ending. Then we have got a short story with art by Jose Quesada. And how embarrassing. They have forgotten to colour it in. Then we get to issue number 5. Another guest star, the Peacemaker. Are you noticing something yet? Marvel seem to have so little faith in this series that they were just using guest stars pretty much every issue to try and get people to buy this book by accident. And in this one, we've also got Ghost Driver. It's actually an alright story, really. It has got an evil reverend, he's a cannibal, and he's got zombies, and then after this one, this is a good one, a good cover as well, Doctor Strange versus Magic Moor, and this is where the Charlotte Witch strand plays out. We have got Charlotte Witch and Doctor Strange. They go to confront the central characters, and they get into a fight with Magic Moor because Magic Moor is a villain, and we get a really good fight between Doctor Strange and Magic Moor, and it has a clever ending too. And the problem is, after this two-part story, after it concludes, I feel they've kind of exhausted their most interesting subplot. They were building up that Charlotte Witch stuff, and her being possessed, early on in the book, her being possessed, it's not really relevant at all. It's not mentioned again. It's not even part of this story. Why was she possessed? What was happening? The next 3 issues, though, they are guest star free, and they are also some of the worst. I really have no idea why they collected this series. In this story, Bill Buchanan, he turns out to be a traitor, and he turns on Victoria and Whoopi Goldberg. He really, he starts fighting them and stuff. And it just comes out of nowhere, and it's really poorly handled, and that's the only stuff to do with his character. And there's this bit here with a woman. She gets a page of the Dark Book from the river, and nothing comes of this either. It's never referred to again. In the next issue, we get introduced to the 5th and final central character. It is Whoopi Goldberg's grandson, and he isn't given much character either, but there is one element that comes up later that is at least interesting. And at the end of this story, despite Bill having turned traitor, they forgive him, and he's just given wipe the slate clean, and he's forgiven. And then we've got 2 more short stories. One is just a Ghost Driver story that uses the formula of this book, but with Ghost Driver. And that is interesting, I guess. But then we have got part 3 of a 5-part crossover called Midnight Mascara. And this really doesn't work without the rest. The problem is the whole crossover involves the Dark Book. It has got Blade, Wesley Snipes. He gets possessed by one of the pages, and he turns white. And this part, it's mostly a fight between Blade and Magic Moor. It's a good fight, I will say that, but this whole story was relevant. It should have been collected. It involves the Dark Book. It's central to the story. It's important. The whole thing is built out of this book's setup. Actually, had on, even the covers, all the covers for the crossover, they were designed to look like the black envelopes that Warwick Davis was handing out. I know space is an issue in collections, but you really needed this crossover. If it needs 2 volumes to collect the whole series, then give it 2 volumes. But we know that honestly they didn't put this out because people were wanting it or because people were going to buy it. They just put it out just anticipating completionists and freaks like me who will buy it. Then after this, though, we have got probably the strongest issue of the series. This is a Magic Moor Spotlight issue. It's really good. It explores his character and his motivation. Really good. As I said, he is the most interesting of all the characters in this book, and this does a good job with that. I wonder if the reason he is the most interesting is because he is a pre-existing character. The writer, he is having to build around what already exists with Magic Moor. Whereas the other 3, he doesn't really know what or how to build a character. And this issue, though, right, if you only read 1 issue of this whole series, I would say go for this one. Then we start to build to the big climax, the big finale, and it's a dud. The next couple of issues, they are a mess of ideas. The characters make bizarre choices, and out of nowhere, Bill decides that he is in love with Victoria, even though he betrayed her a couple of issues before. But of course, he can't have her because she is a lesbian, and it's just really just an excuse to give him some angst. And there's this bit is odd. It's something you will never see in a comic again. Whoopi Goldberg's grandson is just randomly a homophobic bigot. Nowadays, it's only white people that are bigots, and it's really odd writing too. Really odd that they are making one of the focus characters a homophobe like this. Victoria, she tells them that she is a lesbian, and the kid, he is like, "What? Like, you mean you are a yikes?" That's the comic there. That's trying to sneak the word dyke in. I'm not the one saying it, it's a comic. And Victoria tells him off, and he goes further with, "Whatever, just don't get so close. I don't want to catch AIDS." It's just really odd writing. Like, I get that maybe the writer wanted to show some resistance or prejudice towards Victoria for her sexual preference, but this is just odd. Like, they have a pretty sensible bit earlier on with her father not approving of it. I mean, that is trite and cliche, but it's fine for what it is. I just don't know why they've got this kid suddenly being really homophobic. Like, you could have him be ignorant, but this isn't ignorance. This is just legitimate homophobia. These 2 or 3 issues are bad. There is one good idea in them. Let's find something about it. There's one good idea with Whoopi Goldberg's grandson becoming Magic Moor's apprentice, and maybe Magic Moor can teach him to be not homophobic. And then we get to the end, and what happens is we have got part 6 and part 12 of a 17-part crossover, and these issues are worthless, really. Without the rest of the story, nothing makes much sense, and you have zero context. And in this issue, the only 2 things that have out to do with the Dark Books cast is there's one of the characters dies, and we get a short scene here with Magic Moor and Whoopi Goldberg's grandson. And then we get to part 12, which is also the final issue of the Dark Books series. And what the fuck is Magic Moor even wearing? This one, though, it reads a bit better, but it's still lacking so much context or relevance. There is a pretty Vietnamese woman, though, like really pretty. This has got a good little Magic Moor bit too. He fights a demon, and then the book, it just abruptly ends with a scene with Magic Moor and Warwick Davis in a graveyard, and they're just quickly tying off some loose ends. But there was an enormous loose end that they didn't resolve, so we get a short story here, which ironically is better than most of the issues of the series. This addresses the big loose end, and finally we have got an issue of Doctor Strange, and this is from like 2 or 3 years after Dark Books was cancelled, and it's admirable that another writer came along and he decided to finally tie off the big loose end from the series that no one really read. And this is a really good issue, actually. It's also, interestingly, the last issue of Doctor Strange's solo book. That's Victoria there, Victoria Malteser. And the bonuses in this they're pretty limited. We have just got two adverts, and that's nice, isn't it? That's nice. They have put a fucking spoiler on the back. So if you want to know which of the characters dies at the end, it's on the fucking back cover. This series is not very good. There are good ideas, there's good bits, and it does actually have potential. It just lacks finesse. As I said, a co-writer would have definitely helped. The art isn't great. We start off with a rotating cast of artists, and some of them are bad, and some of them are all right. We settle into one artist around about issue 7, and at least then it brings a consistent look to the book. As a collection, I would say this fails. It is a quick, half-assed cash grab for something that has limited appeal and won't grab much cash. They just went, hey, let's put out a trade collecting every issue of Dark Books. And they clearly didn't consider the intricacies of collecting it, like the Midnight Mascara storyline that is essential. Those last 2 issues are barely stories without the other 15 parts. And finally, this is, like most Marvel trades nowadays, it's a high price point, $40, but it is poor quality. Like, everyone knows about the printing issues with single issues. Like, covers being the same stock as the interiors, ink rubbing off straight away, pages falling out. The trades are suffering from it just as bad, and arguably worse, since they are priced so much higher. What happened was, Axel Alonso specifically, he refused to print anything but big, expensive trade paperbacks, because he reckoned that if they put out more affordable, smaller collections of 5 or 8 issues, whatever, he reckoned that if they put them out, it would just draw away from the expensive ones. So we just get expensive collections like this, and the quality is rubbish. The paper is really thin. Like, I feel I have to be careful or I'll end up scrunching up all the pages. And, like, actually, this is a good way. Just watch this. You shouldn't be able to do that. I don't want to recommend this trade. If you want to read about Magic Moor, that's its only use, really. Victoria, alright character, really, potential in her, and she's pretty, but after that Doctor Strange issue, the Dark Books issue, I don't think she ever appeared again. I don't think Magic Moor ever appeared that much after this. I can only think of one other story that he was in, and it certainly didn't pay attention to Outdone with him in this. No idea why they collected this. It's not good, it's not acclaimed, it wasn't popular, it doesn't have any relevance. I'll rate it 7 thumbs up.